My name is Adriana and I'm 32 years old. As I sit here in my 2009 Honda Civic, wrapped in 3 blankets that still cannot keep out the November cold in Columbus, Ohio, I realize this rusted car has become my entire world. 3 weeks ago, I had a husband, a home, a career, and what I thought was a beautiful life. Tonight, I have nothing but the clothes in my suitcase and about $800 to my name. But what I did not know then was that a stranger was about to walk into my life and change everything with just one question. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how my darkest moment became the beginning of something I never could have imagined. 8 years ago, I met Marcus at an art exhibition in downtown Columbus. I remember that evening so clearly because it was the first time in my life that I felt truly seen by someone. I was 24, working in the accounting department at a large hospital in the city, living a quiet and predictable life. I had gone to the exhibition alone, something I often did on Friday evenings, to unwind after long weeks of staring at spreadsheets and balancing budgets. The gallery was small but elegant, tucked away on a side street that I had walked past dozens of times without ever noticing. That night, something pulled me inside. Marcus was standing in front of a painting of a woman looking out a window, her face partially hidden by shadows. He was tall with dark hair and the kind of confident posture that made him stand out in any room. When he noticed me looking at the same painting, he smiled and said something about how the artist captured loneliness so beautifully. We talked for 2 hours that night, standing in that gallery until the staff politely asked us to leave. He was a lawyer at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, ambitious and articulate with a way of speaking that made everything sound important and meaningful. We exchanged numbers, and by the following weekend, we were having dinner together at a restaurant I could never have afforded on my own. Marcus paid for everything without making me feel small about it. He asked questions about my life, my dreams, my family. He seemed genuinely interested in who I was, not just what I looked like or what I could offer him. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found someone who truly understood me. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. The wedding was small and intimate, just close friends and family gathered in a lovely garden venue outside the city. My mother Linda flew in from Texas for the occasion. She was already struggling with her health back then, dealing with diabetes and early signs of heart problems, but she insisted on being there. Watching her cry happy tears as I walked down the aisle remains one of the most precious memories I have. After the wedding, Marcus and I bought a house together in a quiet suburb. It was a charming 3-bedroom home with a small backyard and a front porch where I imagined we would sit together, growing old. I poured all of my savings into the down payment, nearly $40,000 that I had worked years to accumulate. Marcus handled all the paperwork and I trusted him completely. Why would I not trust my own husband? Those first 3 years of marriage felt like a dream. We would cook dinner together on weekends, trying new recipes, and making a mess of the kitchen while laughing about our failures. Friday nights were reserved for movies on the couch, wrapped in blankets with popcorn and cheap wine. We talked about having children someday, maybe 2, a boy and a girl. We talked about traveling to Europe, about growing old together in that little house with the garden I tended so carefully. I put my own ambitions on hold during those years. I had always wanted to pursue a master's degree in finance, to advance my career and eventually move into a management position. But Marcus's career was taking off, and someone needed to keep the household running smoothly. I told myself there would be time for my dreams later. I told myself that supporting my husband's success was an investment in our future together. Around the 5th year of our marriage, things began to shift in ways I did not want to acknowledge. Marcus started working late more often. At first it was once or twice a week, but gradually it became almost every night. He would come home after 10 o'clock sometimes, after midnight, smelling of expensive restaurants, and claiming he had been entertaining clients or preparing for big cases. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that the life we had built was real. His phone habits changed too. He started keeping it face down on every surface, taking calls in another room with the door closed. When I asked about it once, casually trying not to sound accusatory, he laughed and said I was being paranoid. He changed his password, something he had never done before in our entire marriage. When I noticed, I told myself it was probably for work security reasons. Lawyers deal with sensitive information after all. One evening while doing laundry, I found a hotel receipt in the pocket of his jacket. It was from a boutique hotel downtown, dated for a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks prior. When I asked him about it, my voice carefully neutral, he did not even hesitate. "Client meeting," he said. "The conference rooms at the hotel are nicer than the ones at the office." His explanation was smooth, delivered with the ease of someone who had practiced such lies many times before. I accepted it because the alternative was too painful to consider. My mother called me every Sunday evening without fail. During one of those calls about 6 months before everything fell apart, she asked me directly if something was wrong. I could hear the concern in her voice, the maternal instinct that sensed trouble even from 1,000 miles away. I assured her that everything was fine, that Marcus and I were happy, that work was going well. I lied to my own mother because I had not yet admitted the truth to myself. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the emotional distance that had grown between us like a wall I could not climb. But at the time, I was so invested in the life I thought we were building that I could not bear to examine it too closely. I was afraid of what I might find. The night my world shattered began like any other Tuesday evening. Marcus had left for what he called an emergency meeting at the office, grabbing his briefcase and barely kissing my cheek before rushing out the door. I was used to these sudden departures by then, so I simply settled onto the couch with a book and a cup of tea, expecting him to return in a few hours with another story about demanding clients and impossible deadlines. About 30 minutes after he left, I noticed his phone sitting on the kitchen counter. He had forgotten it, which was unusual because Marcus was normally attached to that device, like it was an extension of his hand. I picked it up, intending to put it somewhere safe, when the screen lit up with an incoming message. The preview showed just a few words, but those words burned themselves into my memory forever. The message was from someone named Jessica. It read, "I cannot wait to see you tonight. I have been thinking about you all day." My hands began to shake. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knew I should put the phone down, should wait for Marcus to come home and explain, should give him the benefit of the doubt like I always did. But something inside me had finally reached its breaking point. I needed to know the truth. His password had changed, but I tried his birthday then, mine, then our anniversary. None worked. Then I tried the date we first met and the phone unlocked. Part of me wished it had stayed locked forever. What I found in his messages destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. There were hundreds of texts between Marcus and Jessica spanning back nearly 2 years. 2 years of lies, of secret meetings, of declarations of love that should have been meant for me. The messages were intimate in ways I cannot bring myself to describe in detail. There were photographs too, images that made me physically ill. Jessica, I learned from reading their conversations, was a 26-year-old paralegal at Marcus's firm. She was young, ambitious, and apparently had been involved with my husband since before our 5th wedding anniversary. They had met at a company retreat and had been carrying on their affair right under my nose ever since. Some of their messages mentioned me, directly mocking my naivety, laughing about how easy it was to deceive me. I sat on the kitchen floor for what felt like hours, my back against the cabinets, the phone clutched in my trembling hands. I could not cry. I could not scream. I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and removed everything that made me human. The life I had built, the future I had imagined, the man I had devoted myself to for 8 years, all of it was a lie. When Marcus finally came home around 11 o'clock that night, I was still sitting on the kitchen floor. He walked in with a smile on his face, probably fresh from being with her, and that smile faded the moment he saw me holding his phone. For a brief second, I saw panic flash across his features. Then almost immediately, it was replaced by something cold and calculating. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I simply looked at him and asked one question. How long he did not even try to deny it. Instead, he sighed like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the one who had done something wrong by discovering his betrayal. He sat down at the kitchen table and told me in a voice completely devoid of emotion that he had been seeing Jessica for almost 2 years. He said he was in love with her. He said he wanted a divorce. What he said next cut even deeper than the affair itself. He told me that I had become boring, predictable, unattractive. He said I had let myself go, that I was no longer the woman he had married. He blamed me for his infidelity, claiming that if I had been a better wife, he never would have strayed. Every word was a knife, and he delivered them with surgical precision. Then came the final blow. Marcus informed me that the house, our house, the home I had poured my life savings into, was in his name only. He had handled all the paperwork when we bought it, and apparently he had made sure that I was never on the title. I had trusted him so completely that I never thought to verify, never thought to protect myself legally. Now I was discovering that my trust had been weaponized against me. He told me I had to leave. The house belonged to him, and he wanted me out within the week. He was going to move Jessica into my home, into the spaces I had decorated with love, the rooms where I had imagined raising our children. She would sleep in my bed, cook in my kitchen, tend the garden I had planted with my own hands. I packed a suitcase that night and drove to a motel near the highway. I could not sleep, could not eat, could not do anything, but stare at the ceiling and replay every moment of my marriage, searching for signs I had missed. By morning, I had realized that there were too many to count. 1 week after I discovered the affair, I lost my job. The hospital called me into a meeting with Human Resources and informed me that my position was being eliminated due to budget cuts. It seemed suspicious given that the department was busier than ever, but I was in no state to fight it. Later, I would learn that Marcus had connections on the hospital's board of directors, and I strongly suspect he pulled strings to ensure I would have nothing to fall back on. The isolation came swiftly after that. Friends I had known for years suddenly stopped returning my calls. Couples we had socialized with chose Marcus's side, likely because he was wealthy and influential, while I was now unemployed and alone. Even Danielle, my closest friend since college, told me she did not want to get in the middle of things. She said she would call me soon, but that call never came. Within a month of finding those messages, I had lost my husband, my home, my job, and my entire social network. I was 32 years old and I had nothing left. The first night I slept in my car, I told myself it was temporary. Just a few days, maybe a week, until I could find an apartment I could afford with my dwindling savings. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour Walmart, reasoning that a busy parking lot would be safer than a deserted street. I folded down the back seat of my Honda Civic, arranged my blankets as best I could, and tried to pretend I was just camping. I could not pretend for long. The reality of my situation sank in with the cold that crept through the windows, despite being rolled up tight. November in Ohio is brutal, and my old car did not retain heat well. I layered every piece of clothing I owned and still woke up shivering at 3 a.m, my breath visible in the frigid air. My daily routine became a study in survival and humiliation. I would wake at dawn, stiff and aching from sleeping in an impossible position, and drive to a gas station to use the restroom. I washed my face with paper towels and cold water, trying to make myself look presentable enough to search for jobs. I had signed up for a cheap gym membership, just $15 a month specifically, so I could shower somewhere with hot water and a locking door. I ate as little as possible to stretch my money further. Breakfast was usually a packet of instant oatmeal that I mixed with cold water because I had no way to heat it. Lunch was a sandwich made from the cheapest bread and deli meat I could find. Dinner was often skipped entirely or replaced with a handful of crackers if the hunger became too intense to ignore. The shame was overwhelming. Every time a security guard knocked on my window in the middle of the night telling me I could not sleep there, I felt smaller and smaller. Every time I walked into a fast food restaurant just to use the bathroom without buying anything, I felt the weight of their stares. Every time I caught my reflection in a store window with my unwashed hair and wrinkled clothes, I barely recognized myself. Job hunting from a car is nearly impossible. Most applications require a home address, and listing my vehicle did not seem like a winning strategy. I used the address of a local shelter I had visited once for mail purposes, but I could not bring myself to actually stay there. The shelter was crowded and chaotic, filled with people whose stories of hardship made mine seem trivial by comparison. I felt like a fraud, like I did not deserve help, because my circumstances were somehow my own fault. I went on a few job interviews during those weeks, each one an exercise in futility. I could not iron my clothes properly, so I arrived wrinkled despite my best efforts to smooth out the fabric with my hands. My hair was never quite clean enough, my makeup never quite right, because I was applying it in the dim light of my car's interior. One interviewer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at me with such obvious pity that I almost burst into tears right there in her office. She said the words I had come to dread, "We will be in touch." They never were. Throughout all of this, I maintained the lie to my mother. Every Sunday, I called her at our usual time, forcing cheerfulness into my voice that I did not feel. I told her I was staying with a friend while looking for a new apartment. I told her the job search was going well, that I had promising leads. I told her everything was fine. The truth was I could not bear to burden her with my problems. She was 64 years old, living alone in a small house in suburban Texas, managing diabetes and a heart condition on a fixed income from her late husband's pension. She had nothing to spare financially or emotionally. If she knew I was sleeping in my car, it would destroy her. So I lied, and the lies ate away at me from the inside. After one particular Sunday call, sitting in my car in a library parking lot, I broke down completely. I cried so hard that I could not breathe, great heaving sobs that fogged up all the windows and left me gasping for air. I cried for the life I had lost, for the future I would never have, for the naive girl who had trusted the wrong man with everything she had. I cried until there was nothing left, and then I sat in silence, staring at nothing, feeling utterly and completely alone. 3 weeks into my new reality, my body began to revolt against the conditions I was forcing it to endure. It started with a cough dry and persistent that I tried to ignore. Then came the aches deep in my bones that made every movement painful. By the end of that 3rd week, I was running a fever that left me soaked in sweat one moment and shivering uncontrollably the next. I had no health insurance. My coverage had ended when I lost my job, and I could not afford COBRA payments or a private plan. So I did nothing about my illness. I bought generic cold medicine from the dollar store and hoped for the best. I drank water and tried to rest as much as one can rest in a car in a parking lot in winter. I told myself it was just a cold, that it would pass. One night, the fever spiked so high that I became delirious. I remember waking up drenched in sweat, my blanket soaked through, unable to remember where I was or how I had gotten there. The world tilted and spun around me. I thought I heard my mother's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. I thought I was dying. In that moment of feverish clarity, I confronted a truth I had been avoiding. I wondered if it would matter if I did die. I wondered how long it would take for anyone to notice, for anyone to find my body in this rusted car in a Walmart parking lot. Days, weeks. The thought was not frightening in the way it should have been. It was just sad, profoundly and deeply sad. But then I thought of my mother. I thought of her sitting in her little house in Texas, waiting for my Sunday call that would never come. I thought of the pain she would feel, the guilt, the questions that would haunt her for the rest of her life. And I knew, even in my delirium, that I could not do that to her. Whatever happened to me, I had to keep fighting. For her, if not for myself. The fever broke, eventually leaving me weak and depleted, but alive. I spent 2 days barely moving, conserving my strength, drinking water, and eating saltine crackers that were all I could stomach. Slowly, painfully, I began to recover. It was during this recovery period that I saw them. Marcus and Jessica walking through the parking lot of a shopping centre where I had parked to rest. They were holding hands, laughing at some private joke, looking like a magazine advertisement for the perfect couple. She was wearing designer clothes and carrying a shopping bag from an expensive boutique. On her finger, I caught the glint of a diamond ring, and my stomach dropped when I recognized it. It was my engagement ring, the one Marcus had given me 8 years ago, the one he had demanded back when he threw me out. They walked right past my car without seeing me. I had slumped down in my seat, heart-pounding tears streaming down my face. They were so close I could have rolled down my window and touched them, but they did not notice. To them, I did not exist. I had been erased from their world as completely as if I had never been there at all. After they disappeared into another store, I sat in my car and cried. But these tears were different from the ones that had come before. There was anger in them, a burning rage that I had not allowed myself to feel until that moment. I had been too busy blaming myself, too busy wondering what I had done wrong, too busy accepting the narrative Marcus had created. Now seeing him parade around with the woman he had betrayed me for wearing the ring he had stolen from my finger, something shifted inside me. I was not okay. My situation was not okay. But I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. And someday, somehow, I would find a way to make things right. That night was the coldest yet. The temperature dropped below 20 degrees, and even with the engine running for heat, I could not stop shivering. I had already spent too much on gas that week, and I knew I could not afford to run the engine much longer. So I turned it off and huddled under my blankets, watching my breath form clouds in the darkness. I pulled out my phone and opened a new text message to my mother. My fingers were numb from the cold, but I managed to type a few words. I love you, Mom. I am sorry. I saved the message as a draft, unable to bring myself to send it, but unable to delete it either. It sat there in my phone, a testament to how close I had come to the edge. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my car, wondering how my life had come to this. I thought about every decision I had made, every path I had taken that led me to this frozen parking lot in the middle of nowhere. And I made a promise to myself, if I survived this night, I would find a way forward. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was, I would not give up. I survived the night. I woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through my frost-covered windows, my joints aching and my spirit bruised but still intact. I started the car to warm up, then drove to the only place where I knew I could find warmth and a semblance of dignity, the public library. The Columbus Metropolitan Library had become my refuge during those dark weeks. It was warm, it was free, and it offered something I desperately needed, the illusion of normalcy. I could sit at a table with my laptop connected to the free Wi-Fi and pretend I was just another person doing research or catching up on work. For a few hours each day, I could forget that I had nowhere to go when they closed. That particular morning, I arrived as soon as the doors opened. I found a quiet corner near the periodicals section and settled in with my laptop, determined to spend the day applying for every job listing I could find. I was halfway through an application for a data entry position when an elderly woman approached my table. She was small and slight, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a volunteer badge that identified her as Eleanor. Without saying a word, she set down a paper cup of hot coffee and a blueberry muffin wrapped in a napkin. I looked up at her, startled and confused. She smiled gently and said, "You look like you could use this, dear." I started to protest, to say I could not accept charity, but she held up her hand. "I have been watching you come in every day for 2 weeks now," she said quietly. "I do not know your story, and you do not have to tell me, but I know that everyone has hard times. There is no shame in accepting a little kindness." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me sitting there with tears threatening to spill over. I do not know if Eleanor ever understood what her simple gesture meant to me. That cup of coffee and that muffin were the first acts of pure, unconditional kindness I had received since my world fell apart. In that moment, I felt a tiny spark of hope that I thought had been extinguished forever. I spent the rest of the morning at the library, warmed by the coffee and the memory of Eleanor's words. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I decided to return to my car and move to a different parking lot before evening. As I walked across the library parking lot, I noticed a man standing near my vehicle. He was middle-aged, perhaps in his late 50s, wearing a well-tailored grey suit that seemed out of place in this part of the city. He was looking at my car as if he were searching for something. My instincts told me to turn around to avoid whatever trouble this stranger might represent. But before I could, he looked up and saw me. His expression shifted from uncertainty to recognition. "Excuse me," he called out as I approached. "Are you Adriana Marie Thompson?" I stopped walking. My heart began to race. No one had called me by my full name in years, and certainly no stranger should have known it. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if Marcus had sent someone after me, if this man was a process server or a debt collector or something worse. "Who is asking?" I replied, keeping my distance. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it toward me. "My name is Robert Callahan. I am an attorney with Morrison & Partners in San Francisco. I have been searching for you for almost 3 weeks. I did not take the card. Why would a lawyer from California be looking for me?" Robert's expression softened. He seemed to sense my fear and suspicion. "Miss Thompson," he said gently, "this is going to sound strange, and I understand if you are skeptical, but I need to speak with you about your father." "My father?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "I do not have a father. I mean, obviously I had one biologically, but I never knew him. My mother said he left before I was born." Robert nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. "Your father's name was Henry Wallace. He passed away 2 months ago in San Francisco. Before he died, he made arrangements to locate you and include you in his estate." I stared at this stranger in his expensive suit, trying to make sense of his words. Henry Wallace. The name meant nothing to me. My mother had never spoken about my father beyond saying that he had been a mistake from her past. Someone who had abandoned her when she needed him most. I had stopped asking questions about him by the time I was 10 years old. "I think you have the wrong person," I said slowly. Robert shook his head. I have DNA, evidence, birth records, and your father's own written statement. He tracked your life from a distance for over 30 years. He knew about your marriage, your job, even your current situation. He paused delicately. Miss Thompson, your father left you his entire estate. The total value is approximately $65 million. The world tilted. I felt my knees buckle and grabbed the side of my car for support. $65 million. It was not possible. It was some kind of scam, some elaborate con designed to take advantage of desperate people like me. But even as I thought this, I saw the sincerity in Robert's eyes, the careful professionalism with which he presented this impossible information. I do not understand, I whispered. If he knew about me all this time, why did he never reach out? Robert's expression grew sad. That is a complicated question, and I think your father's letter explains it better than I could. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. He left this for you. He said you should read it before making any decisions. I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name was written on the front in elegant handwriting that I did not recognize. Inside, I could see pages of dense text. A letter from a father I never knew explaining a lifetime of absence. Miss Thompson, Robert continued, I know this is overwhelming. I am not asking you to believe everything right now, but I am asking you to come to California with me so we can verify everything legally. All expenses will be covered by the estate. If after reviewing all the documents and evidence you decide this is not something you want to pursue, you are free to walk away. But I believe you will find that everything I have told you is true. I looked at this man then, at the envelope in my hands, then at my old Honda Civic, with its frost-covered windows and the blankets visible through the back seat. What did I have to lose? My situation could not possibly get worse than sleeping in a car in the middle of winter. And if there was even a small chance that this stranger was telling the truth, then my entire life was about to change. When do we leave? I asked. 48 hours later, I was sitting in a leather chair in the conference room of Morrison & Partners, overlooking the San Francisco skyline. The offices occupied the top 3 floors of a building in the financial district, all glass and steel and quiet efficiency. I felt completely out of place in my wrinkled clothes, surrounded by lawyers and accountants in designer suits. Robert had been true to his word. He had booked me a first-class plane ticket and a room at a hotel nicer than any I had ever stayed in before. He had given me an advance from the estate to buy appropriate clothes for our meetings and had treated me with unfailing respect and patience as I struggled to process everything that was happening. Now surrounded by legal documents and financial statements, I was beginning to understand the scope of what I had inherited. Henry Wallace had built his fortune in commercial real estate, acquiring properties throughout California and Nevada over the course of 40 years. He owned apartment buildings, shopping centers, and office complexes. He held substantial stock portfolios and had accounts in banks whose names I had only ever heard in news reports about wealthy people. The total value of the estate was $63 million in liquid assets, plus real property valued at approximately $18 million more. After taxes and fees, I would receive slightly over $65 million. But more than the money, I was trying to understand the man who had left it to me. Robert provided photographs Henry as a young man, dark-haired and handsome, in a way that I could see reflected in my own features. Henry in middle age, standing in front of various properties with the proud look of a successful businessman. Henry in his final years, grey and thin from the cancer that would eventually take his life, but still smiling in family photos with a woman and 2 young men I did not recognize. His other family, Robert, explained gently. Henry married Patricia in 1989. They had 2 sons, William and Thomas. He paused. They know about you and they know about the inheritance. Henry was very careful to provide for them separately. Patricia received the family home and a trust fund. The sons each received $5 million and positions in the company. But the bulk of his fortune he left to you. Why, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since that parking lot in Columbus. Why me? He had another family. He had sons he actually raised. Why leave everything to a daughter he never met? Robert handed me the envelope I had received 2 days ago. I think you should read his letter now. It will answer your questions better than I can. I opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. My father's handwriting was elegant but shaky, the script of a dying man trying to set things right before the end. Dear Adriana, the letter began. I do not expect you to forgive me for what I am about to confess. I only hope you will understand. The letter told the story of a young man named Henry Wallace, who fell in love with a woman named Linda in the summer of 1991. They met at a business conference in Houston, where he was an up-and-coming real estate developer, and she was working as an administrative assistant. Their affair was brief but passionate, and by the time they parted ways, Linda was pregnant. "She called to tell me about you," the letter continued. "I was already engaged to Patricia by then, and I was a coward. I told Linda I could not be part of your life, that I would provide financial support, but nothing more. She refused my money. She said she did not want anything from a man who would abandon his own child. She was right to refuse." The letter went on to describe how Henry had tracked my life from afar, hiring private investigators to provide updates on my progress through school, my college graduation, my career, my marriage. He knew about Marcus almost from the beginning and had worried about me. He knew when things started to go wrong, though he did not know the details of what had happened in recent months. "I have watched you grow into a remarkable woman," he wrote, "and I have been too ashamed to approach you directly. I told myself that I was respecting your mother's wishes, but the truth is that I was afraid. Afraid of your rejection, afraid of disrupting the family I had built with Patricia, afraid of confronting the mistake I made 32 years ago." The letter ended with an apology and a plea. "I am dying now, and I cannot undo the past. But I can give you what I should have given you all along: security, opportunity, and the knowledge that despite my absence, I always loved you. Please use this inheritance well. Live a life that brings you joy. And if you can find it in your heart, forgive a foolish old man who waited too long to do the right thing." I set the letter down on the conference table, my hands shaking and my eyes blurred with tears. The emotions churning inside me were too complex to untangle: anger at a father who had abandoned me, grief for a relationship I would never have, gratitude for this unexpected lifeline, and underneath it all, a strange sense of peace. Over the next several days, I completed the legal process of accepting my inheritance. There were forms to sign, accounts to transfer, properties to inspect. I met with financial advisors who explained investment strategies and tax implications. I met with the estate attorney who walked me through every detail of Henry's will. I even met Patricia and my half-brothers, William and Thomas, at a carefully arranged lunch that was awkward but not hostile. They had their own complicated feelings about their father's secret daughter, but they were not contesting the will. Henry had been generous with them too, and they seemed to understand, at least intellectually, why he had done what he did. By the end of my first week in California, I had a clearer picture of my new reality. I was wealthy beyond anything I had ever imagined. I owned a beautiful estate in Napa Valley with vineyards and a main house that could fit my old suburban home inside it 3 times over. I had bank accounts with more zeros than I could count without getting dizzy. But I also knew that money alone would not heal the wounds of the past months. Marcus had betrayed me in ways that no amount of wealth could erase. I had lost not just my marriage, but my sense of self, my trust in my own judgment, my belief in the fairness of the world. The inheritance gave me options, but the work of rebuilding my life would still have to be done one painful step at a time. After 2 weeks in California, I felt strong enough to return to Ohio. There was unfinished business there, loose ends that needed to be tied before I could truly move forward. Chief among them was Marcus. I hired a lawyer of my own, a fierce woman named Catherine, who specialized in divorce cases involving financial manipulation. She reviewed my marriage, the house purchase, the way Marcus had systematically excluded me from ownership of our shared assets. What she found made her angry on my behalf. "You contributed significantly to that property," she told me. "He may have kept your name off the title, but you have bank records showing your contribution to the down payment and years of shared expenses. We can make a case for unjust enrichment. It will not be easy, but we can fight." "Fight," I said. "I want to fight." The legal battle took 2 months. Marcus, confident in his own legal expertise, initially dismissed my case as the desperate flailing of a bitter ex-wife. But Catherine was better than him. She gathered evidence, deposed witnesses, built a case that exposed not only his financial manipulation, but also his pattern of deception throughout our marriage. When she subpoenaed his firm's internal communications, she found emails that suggested he had indeed used his connections to have me fired from the hospital. That revelation opened up additional claims for damages. In the end, Marcus settled out of court. He agreed to pay me $150,000, which was far less than he had taken from me in terms of my actual contributions to our shared life, but far more than he had expected to lose. More importantly, the settlement included a clause preventing him from speaking about me publicly, a gag order that protected my privacy and my reputation. The day the settlement was finalised, I saw Marcus one final time. We were in a conference room at Catherine's office, surrounded by lawyers and paperwork. He looked tired and angry, his charm stripped away by weeks of legal pressure and unwanted exposure. When the documents were signed and the meeting concluded, I asked to speak with him alone for just a moment. Catherine raised an eyebrow, but stepped outside with the other attorneys. Marcus and I stood on opposite sides of the conference table, two strangers who had once promised to love each other forever. "I wanted to tell you something," I said quietly, what he sounded defensive, expecting an attack. "I forgive you." He blinked clearly, not expecting that. "You forgive me," I nodded. "Not because you deserve it. Not because what you did was okay. I forgive you because carrying this anger is too heavy, and I refuse to let you take anything else from me. I forgive you so I can be free." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, shame, or maybe just surprise that the woman he had dismissed as boring and unattractive had found the strength to stand before him without bitterness. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said, and I walked out of that conference room without looking back. The months that followed were a journey of healing that I had not known I needed. I left Ohio behind and moved to Texas, buying a lovely 4-bedroom house just 20 minutes from my mother's home. When I finally told her the truth about everything about Marcus, about the homelessness, about the inheritance, she cried for 3 hours straight. Then she hugged me tight and did not let go for a very long time. I made sure she received the best medical care available. I took her to specialists who adjusted her diabetes treatment and addressed her heart condition with a comprehensive plan. I watched the colour return to her cheeks, the worry lines ease from her forehead, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time: hope. For myself, I began therapy with a psychologist who specialised in trauma and betrayal. In those sessions, I unpacked not just the marriage and its end, but the patterns that had led me there. I examined my tendency to prioritise others at the expense of myself, my reluctance to question the people I loved, my fear of conflict that had kept me silent when I should have spoken up. It was painful work, but it was necessary. I also returned to school. At 33, I enrolled in a master's program in business administration, something I had dreamed of for years, but had always put aside for Marcus's career. The coursework was challenging, but I discovered that I loved learning again. I loved the feeling of my mind expanding, of becoming something more than I had been. With guidance from the financial advisors who now managed my inheritance, I established a charitable foundation. Its mission was to help women who had experienced financial abuse in their relationships, women whose partners had controlled their access to money, manipulated them out of assets, or left them destitute after the relationship ended. I funded emergency housing, legal assistance, job training, and financial literacy programs. I called it the New Chapter Foundation because that was what I was living, a new chapter. One autumn afternoon, I made a special trip back to Columbus. I drove to the library where I had spent so many desperate hours, walked through the familiar doors, and asked to speak with Eleanor, the volunteer who had given me coffee and a muffin when I had nothing. She did not recognize me at first. I was dressed well now, my hair clean, and styled my face no longer gaunt from hunger and stress. But when I explained who I was, her eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would be okay," she said softly. "I could see the strength in you even then." I invited her to dinner at one of the nicest restaurants in Columbus. We talked for 3 hours and I told her everything. She listened with the same quiet kindness she had shown me in the library, and at the end of the evening I handed her a check for the library's volunteer program. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place, and she tried to refuse it. "This is because of you," I told her. "You showed me that kindness still exists in the world, that there are good people even in the darkest times. Let me pay that forward." She accepted the check with tears streaming down her face, and I drove back to my hotel feeling lighter than I had in years. The path from that frozen parking lot to where I stand today was not straight or easy. There were setbacks and dark days, moments when the old wounds opened up and bled fresh. But there were also moments of profound joy, watching my mother laugh at a family dinner, receiving my master's degree. reading letters from women whose lives had been changed by the foundation, waking up each morning in a home that was truly mine. Money did not heal me. Let me be clear about that. The inheritance gave me opportunities, yes. It gave me security and options, and the freedom to rebuild my life on my own terms. But the actual healing came from within, from the choice to forgive, the choice to grow, the choice to believe that my worth was not determined by how others treated me. Sometimes I think about Marcus and Jessica, wonder what became of them. I heard through the grapevine that their relationship did not last, that Jessica left him for someone wealthier and younger. I do not know if that is true, and I find that I do not really care. Marcus is part of my past, a chapter that I have closed. He taught me painful lessons about trust and self-worth, but those lessons have made me stronger. I would not be who I am today without them. And I think about my father, Henry Wallace, the man I never knew, but who knew me all along. I have visited his grave several times now in a cemetery overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I do not know if I have forgiven him completely. The abandonment still hurts, and I still wonder what my life would have been like if he had found the courage to be present. But I understand now that people are complicated, that fear makes us do things we regret, that sometimes the best we can do is try to make amends before it is too late. He tried in his own imperfect way, and his gift has allowed me to build a life I never could have imagined. If you are watching this and going through your own dark time, I want you to know something. The worst moment of your life is not the end of your story. It might feel like it. It might feel like there is no way out, no hope, no future. But I am living proof that everything can change. Sometimes the change comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it comes from the kindness of strangers, or the memory of loved ones, or the sheer stubborn refusal to give up when giving up would be so much easier. Keep going. That is all I ask of you. Keep going even when it hurts. Keep going even when you cannot see the path ahead. Keep going because somewhere out there, your new chapter is waiting. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything seemed lost, only to find unexpected hope? What helped you through your darkest time? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder that things can get better. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel so you do not miss the next story, thank you for spending this time with me. I hope that wherever you are, whatever you are facing, you find the strength to turn the page and start your own new chapter. Take care of yourself. You are worth it.